Türkiye is marking 3 years since catastrophic twin earthquakes struck the south of the country, killing more than 50,000 people and displacing millions more as a result of widespread destruction. The tremors first struck when many were asleep at around 1:17 GMT or 4:17 AM local time on the 6th of February. The first earthquake, with a magnitude of 7.7, hit the province of Kahramanmaraş, releasing energy 2,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Hours later, a second earthquake with a magnitude of 7.6 struck again. The disaster affected some 14 million people across the region, causing damage to an area bigger than several European countries. It also hit neighbouring Syria, killing more than 5,000 people there. Turkey now calls the twin quakes the disaster of the century. The disaster also meant authorities faced a huge rebuilding challenge. Bera Karaman has more on the Turkish government's response.
The 7.7 and 7.6 magnitude quakes brought devastation on a ground scale. Kahramanmaraş was at the epicenter of the twin quakes, with the tremors affecting 11 provinces. Hatay, 150 kilometers away from the epicenter, was among the hardest hit city. Buildings were reduced to rubble and neighborhoods destroyed. Adıyaman also suffered heavy damage. Thousands of buildings either collapsed or were impacted. Reconstruction would cost more than $104 billion. In just 3 years, the Turkish government has actioned its rebuilding plan. By the end of 2025, more than 450,000 houses have been handed over to earthquake survivors. The efforts to rebuild safer and stronger communities, a sign of the commitment to never forget those who lost their lives and provide a better future for those who survived.
And in a few seconds, Türkiye will remember a minute of silence to remember the victims of the quakes. Well, our correspondents are standing by in southeastern Türkiye, where the commemoration ceremonies are being held. Asli Akbaş is on standby for us there in Kahramanmaraş, the epicenter of the quakes. But first, let's bring in Kübra Koç, who is in Hatay, one of the hardest hit provinces. Kübra, I know that back in that day 3 years ago, you were one of the first reporters on the ground. Just take us back to that day and your memories of how it all unfolded.
Well, Aaron, 3 years ago at 4:17 a.m. local time, lives of people of Hatay and people of the earthquake region changed forever. And of course, coming back here as a journalist, of course, comes with mixed feelings. As it applies to many people, many residents, many families who are returning to their homes, to their lands, to mark a very special day. When we arrived in the hours leading up to the second day after the earthquake, I remember the shock that we received, immediate shock, seeing the scale of the devastation and destruction, as well as the loss of human life. It was unfathomable, and oftentimes it was difficult to describe. We know more than 50,000 people across 11 provinces killed in these twin devastating earthquakes. 11 provinces were affected, and more than 14 million people directly or indirectly were affected. We will talk more about this, but let's watch my report talking about how families across the earthquake region are rebuilding their own lives, returning to their now earthquake resilient houses and homes. Let's have a watch.
Hasan Temiz was born and raised in Hatay. He was living in Akasya neighborhood in Antakya with his wife Mevlüde Temiz. They were at home together when the earthquake struck 3 years ago.
At 4:17 a.m., when shaking began, we were thrown from wall to wall as TVs and furniture flew around. When the walls collapsed, we panicked, but somehow found each other and got out. It was raining, debris was falling on our heads, the sky turned deep red, and we thought, this is where it ends.
They survived, but their house didn't. Their entire neighborhood was flattened.
As I was running, I thought, this isn't just an earthquake, it was like the apocalypse.
Mevlüde lost his brother in the earthquake, along with other loved ones.
In Hatay, wherever you go, every home has held a funeral. Everyone lost someone they loved in this earthquake.
7 months ago, they returned to their neighborhood and received this new earthquake-resilient house. Their homecoming is part of a broader effort to bring life back to Hatay through the government's mass housing and infrastructure projects.
We're happy. This is our neighborhood of 40 years, back where our old home was with our neighbors.
We feel safe. We've had 2 or 3 earthquakes in this house, and we weren't afraid. We know its foundation. I told my wife, look at the steel. We can live here without fear.
For the Temiz family, returning comes with relief and emotional reckoning.
I never once considered leaving Hatay.
It's impossible to forget that night. We lost everything. But this is human nature. We learn to live with it.
The memories of what was lost are still with them. But they are grateful that their city is rising again. Back in their old neighborhood, this family is home again in a new house that finally feels safe. Yet the loss of the loved ones, some neighbors, and the scars across the city remain profound. But they are determined to move forward and build a new chapter in their beloved city of Hatay. Kübra Akkoç, TRT World, Antakya, Hatay.
Well, Kubra giving us a flavour there from Hatay. Let's bring in Asli Atbash from Kahramanmaraş, the epicentre of those quakes. So reconstruction efforts, Asli, continuing across the region. We'll come to that in a moment. How do things look today?
That's right, and I am at the Pazarcık district of Kahramanmaraş at the moment. This is where the first earthquake hit exactly at 4:17 local time here in Turkey. And 3 years later, hundreds of people have gathered here to commemorate their lost and loved ones. Now let's remember, over 50,000 people lost their lives after these twin earthquakes struck southern Turkey. But not only that, an area of 100,000 kilometers square have been affected, and over 14 million people have been affected, while 2.5 million people have been internally displaced by these earthquakes. And coming to today, fast forward 3 years later, we have been on the ground over the past 2 days to be able to see the reconstruction process on the ground. And we were also able to speak to Turkish officials. Yesterday, we had a meeting with Turkey's Minister of Environment and Urban Planning, Murat Kurum, and he gave us some details on the reconstruction. But I think what really stood out from his remarks that he called it that back in the days, they have announced that their hope should be bigger than the pain, because this was a very big pain for the whole nation. And what was then called this disaster of the century has now turned into the solidarity of the century. Almost 90% of those who have been affected by the earthquakes, their homes have been rebuilt and reconstructed, and over 455,000 new housing units have been delivered so far. Now, in terms of numbers, I think it's very impressive to say that 23 houses per hour have been reconstructed. That's over 500 new housing units per day. But of course, not only housing units. This is a region that's housed to a very important cultural heritage that stretches back to hundreds of years. This is a very important Anatolian region, and one of the most important cultural heritage historical sites, iconic places, are located in this region. For example, the first mosque of Anatolia, the first lighted street of Anatolia are all located in this region, and they have all been reconstructed, rebuilt, preserving their original identity. Now, that's very important when we see it only has been achieved in less than 3 years' time. People have moved back to their homes, but they have also trying to move back to their old lives as well. They are trying to reshape their lives while building those new housing units. Minister Kurum told us that they have also considered how they could rebuild, reshape their lives by building green areas, gardens, parks for children, schools close to their houses. So although they have lost very important things during these earthquakes, they could come back to life with hope, and saying that their hope should be bigger than their pain.
Yeah, so great stories of resilience there, Asli, amid all the reconstruction, but surely also a day of sombre reflection as people remember the lives lost, the homes destroyed, businesses and livelihoods gone within a matter of minutes. These days of commemoration, very much a case of looking ahead to the new, but also looking back as so not to forget.
Indeed, Darren, the construction here is not only physical, it's also human. We were on the ground speaking to people as well. And what I have seen here, they were like really hard stories to listen. They are a story of survival, loss, but also resilience. Of course, life goes on. These people remember their loved ones, their families who lost their lives. But what I have sensed here is that they are strong, and they want to live this life, and not to forget their families, but to be able to live with them. Now, there is an important site here in Kahramanmaraş, that's Ebrar Housing Unit. That was one of the iconic places here in Kahramanmaraş because over 1,000 people lost their lives. That's a very big housing unit that consisted of 30-something buildings. And those buildings have collapsed in seconds, and people were trapped there. But that housing unit has been brought back to life today. It has been completely renewed, rebuilt, and people started to move back there. Now, you may ask, why would they move back to a house where they have lost their families? To be able to better understand that, we went there, we spoke to families, and one story really stood out to us. We have spoken to Gülseren Aksu. Back at time when the earthquake struck, she was in Eskişehir, that's a city that's away hundreds of kilometers away from Kahramanmaraş, visiting her daughter who was working there as a nurse. And that's how she survived this earthquake. But her husband and her 3 children were here in that Ebrar housing unit. Unfortunately, they all lost their lives. And here is our report telling her story.
3 years on, Kahramanmaraş is still rebuilding. Not just homes, but lives. One of the hardest hit places was the Ebrar apartment complex. Entire blocks collapsed in seconds, turning this neighborhood into a symbol of national tragedy.
Today, this place looks very different. The buildings have been completely rebuilt, but the reconstruction here is not just physical, it's also human. We are here to listen to one woman's story. A story of survival, loss, and what it means to return home, even when home holds everything you lost.
On the night of the earthquake, Gülseren was not here. She was visiting her daughter in Eskişehir, hundreds of kilometers away from Kahramanmaraş.
Ben onun ziyaretine gitmiştim.
My return was delayed for a few reasons. I was supposed to come back the day before the earthquake, but I changed my ticket. That's where my destiny changed. If I had returned that day, I would have been at home.
That change of plan saved her life. But inside this building, her husband and 3 children were trapped. She heard the news while she was away. Then came days, she says, felt like a nightmare. One by one, she said goodbye to her family.
Yani aslında
It feels like I died with them that day. But God entrusted me with my daughter, and I hold on to her. I try to stay strong for her. Life goes on somehow. We try to fill the time.
After the funerals, staying here was impossible. Grief pushed her away from Kahramanmaraş, but it followed her wherever she went. For 3 years, she lived out of a suitcase, moving between cities, sleeping on sofas, never feeling settled, until she made a decision many would find impossible: to return.
At first, I was against moving back, but when the construction finished, I felt like my neighbors were calling me back. It's a strange feeling, but now I feel I am home again, back to myself. For 3 years, I felt like a refugee. Now I cook in my own kitchen, I sleep in my own bed.
3 years after the disaster, the Ebrar apartment complex stands again. And inside one of these homes, grief and hope live side by side. Gülseren says the earthquake taught her to live in the present and to imagine a future again. She dreams of becoming a grandmother one day. Because resilience does not mean forgetting. For Gülseren, it means choosing to live, one day at a time. Aslat Baştiyati World, Kahramanmaraş, Türkiye.
Well, we will leave you with some live pictures of the scenes in southern Turkey, where people there have been observing a minute's silence, remembering the victims of those twin quakes that hit the south of the country 3 years ago exactly. And we'll bring you more on this in our later news coverage.
The earth erupted. Homes were unmade, stone by stone. Yet from the broken ground, hands emerged. Scarred, stubborn, alive. Out of ruin, a nation rose. Aid crossed distances. Hope took shape, bit by bit. Doors were opened once more. Footsteps found their way back.
Biz sadece ev, iş yeri, konut yapmadık. Deprem bölgesinde aynı zamanda umutları da inşa ettik.
Time marched on, and together we did more than remember. We rebuilt.
Siz bize güvendiniz, bize inandınız. Bundan sonra da sizi asla yalnız bırakmayacağız.
Türkiye rebuilds. Special coverage on TRT World.